The African Union turns 20 years old this year, and since its birth 20 years ago, it has come a very long way in dealing with regional and continental problems from within and without Africa. Sadly, not many people know of the African Union for many reasons, and the people who do know have very mixed opinions on its effects and usefulness within Africa. So, I raise the question: how useful really is the African Union, and what steps can be taken to change that?
Hi, my name is Melvin, and join me on this journey as I take a look at the answer in a different perspective. But first, here's a disclaimer.
I am not an analyst or a professional on this issue. Analyzing the entire functions and effects of the African Union is a very complex topic with many subtopics that are constantly changing every day. Many people may also see the issue from different angles, which further complicates the topic. I'm simply just putting my perspective and giving my own take on things.
The point of this video is to not only educate, but to create dialogue. Now that is said, let's get back into the video.
The 1960s was a very important time for the African continent. Many former colonies were starting to gain independence from the colonial leaders and become full-fledged nation-states, capable of operating and governing completely on their own. Pan-Africanism was arguably at its height during this time, with many important leaders such as Kwame Nkrumah, who fought for Ghana's independence, championing for Africa's rights to exist individually for itself. The importance of collaboration and partnership was apparent to African leaders, so on May 25, 1963, in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, the Organization of African Unity, or the OAU, was created to address the current issues threatening newly independent nation-states. The OAU is essentially a prequel to the AU. The OAU's primary focus was to help in decolonization matters and aid countries having hard times winning independence to win independence. But this was only primarily effective in Southern Africa. It was a right step in the direction of Pan-Africanism to help integrate the already divided continent. But the organization had many issues and challenges, some of which stemmed from different and diverse beliefs on the desired future of Africa and what steps should be taken to get there. It ended up producing a version of stalemates and accommodations that never truly accomplished the intended, targeted goals it had dreamed of. Some of the issues that led to this include not being active enough in post-colonial issues such as international conflict among nations, was not able to constructively intervene amongst said conflicts, could not settle legal disputes between nations, and it had poor economic ability. Because of this, many people felt the OAU was not representative of the entire African continent and its complex issues, and many African leaders experienced a growing pressure to get rid of the organization altogether and reinstate it with something new and different. The Rwandan genocide of 1994, along with division in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Sierra Leone, and Liberia, also strengthened the already present discontent of the OAU by making African Union leaders reconsider their non-interference stance so they could prevent another atrocity from occurring. The European Union was in many cases experiencing positive feedback during the 1990s, so many Africans wanted something that echoed its form. As a result, the OAU was scheduled to be disbanded in 1999 and replaced with the African Union on July 9, 2002. This move was strongly advocated by former Libyan leader Muammar al-Gaddafi. The African Union brought some things new and unique to the table, and since then, the African Union has been intervening and embodying the role of developer and arbitrator throughout Africa for 2 decades.
This was a very significant event for modern African history, as it demonstrated that African leaders can come together to reevaluate a failing system and replace it with something more promising. But before we get into the main dish, what actually is the African Union and how is it different from the European Union?
On their website, the African Union defines themselves as a continental body consisting of 55 member states that make up the countries of the African continent. Some of the AU's missions are to, quote, accelerate the political and socioeconomic integration of the continent, to advance the development of the continent by promoting research in all fields, in particular in science and technology, and to promote peace, security, and stability on the continent. The organs of the African Union include the Assembly, the Executive Council, the Permanent Representatives Committee, the Peace and Security Council, the Pan-African Parliament, the Economic, Social, and Cultural Council, the Court of Justice, the Commission, specialized technical committees, and financial institutions. All of these organs have unique roles that help the AU be what it is today. Basically, the EU has more economic power, while the AU has more militaristic power.
Overall, the African Union has played a major role within Africa and even outside the continent for the last 20 years. Though the Organization of African Unity had its shortcomings, the African Union has done a lot for Africa in the 21st century.
For example, between 2012 and 2021, Cyril Ramaphosa took over as the Chair of Assembly of the African Union. This position changes every year, so every leader is given an opportunity to lead it and demonstrate unity and fairness. But because of this, most leaders aren't given enough time or resources to enact stable and sustainable change to serve the continent. Regardless of this, he managed to raise $1 billion for vaccines and even finally introduce the African Continental Free Trade Area, which will help increase intercontinental trade in Africa. According to the World Bank and Global Citizen, the African Continental Free Trade Area will create the largest free trade area in the world, connecting 1.3 billion people. The success of this could potentially lift 30 million people out of extreme poverty. But it doesn't stop there. During the Sudanese Civil War, the AU managed to amass over 7,000 fighters to help protect the lives of people in Darfur that may have otherwise not exist today. They played a major role in stabilizing the conflict while also protecting unnecessary death. Since the African Union has deployed some troops in the Somali conflict in 2007, they helped with the removal of Ethiopian soldiers in Mogadishu. They helped diminish Al-Shabaab presence in some areas. They assisted in the construction of new Somali regional administrations. They helped with the election operations in 2012 and 2016. And they helped diplomatic and humanitarian actions become more easily accessible throughout southern Somalia. The AU has developed plans to help further African development and innovation, such as Agenda 2063, which according to their website, is the continent's strategic framework that aims to deliver on its goal for inclusive and sustainable development and is a concrete manifestation of the Pan-African drive for unity, self-determination, freedom, progress, and collective prosperity pursued under Pan-Africanism and African Renaissance. On a global scale, the African Union has helped increase representation in organizations such as the World Health Organization and the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie.
Even though the African Union has had many positive effects since its birth, there are still many things that they have failed to do or struggled to accomplish.
For example, even though the AU did intervene and save lives in the Sudanese conflict, the overall operation was largely unsuccessful. The Inquiry's journal stating the reason is due to the failure of the AU to address the issues of disarmament and demobilization of the John Reed forces, and the failure to address the issues of land and water resources, as well as ongoing national power struggles. Even though the AU tries to speak out against controversial events like military takeovers, soldiers still control and represent countries in Africa nonetheless, and countries still proceed as they normally would. West Africa has been experiencing a series of coups within 2021 and 2022, and even though the AU condemns such violence, they do not undergo any actions that would help stabilize said countries. Not to mention the threat of Islamic insurgency groups is still looming throughout many West African countries, with most countries having to rely on their former colonial rulers, such as France, for help. One could argue that the interesting relationship between AU members and coups after its inception is the fact that many member states, such as Libya and Sudan, came into power through coups. There are some other issues with the AU, such as Paul Kagame's endeavor to try to revive some aspect of the AU, causing major disagreement and confusion with the organization, which ended up stifling both the staff and the commission. Muammar Gaddafi tried to get it transformed to a union government, but it never happened. Ultimately, the African Union has been impeded by people trying to change it, which ended up having the opposite effect intended. Another issue is the union's sometimes lackadaisical attitude towards coups. A few examples where they executed swift response to coups was in Togo in 2005, Madagascar in 2009, Niger in 2010, and Egypt in 2013. But there were some instances where the African Union did not sanction governments for illegitimate transfers of power, such as in Zimbabwe in 2017. Even though many people did support the ousting of Robert Mugabe, there were no elections that supported that, and the imminence of impeachment was persuaded by lawless application of pressure.
When looking at all of these details, I find that a major problem of the African Union is a lack of strong central leadership that, without it, causes the organization to fail to exact any real influence over its members. There are many things I want to see in the future of the African Union if they truly want to live up to their Pan-African dreams.
First and foremost, the African Union needs to be more centralized, with rotating leaders needing to have more than a one-year term. The Union needs to speak up more and get involved in every atrocity and instance of human rights violations and abuse of power. It needs to be more combative to not only stop, but prevent corruption from within government organizations and to punish those who fail to uphold the rights of those they promise to protect. As most Africans know, corruption is a major problem that is not being addressed the way it should be. The AU needs to stop trying to emulate Western ideals of society, arts, culture, and goals, and it needs to focus more on the African citizen and what they want and what works best for them. They need to put more attention to getting rid of currency that still benefits their colonial oppressors, such as the franc, and it needs to increase time to create and implement a single, continental-wide currency similar to that of the euro. Compared to the rest of the world, Africa's natural environment has not been exploited and destroyed for profit to a level like Europe or South America. And even though it does not contribute to the majority of global pollution and the climate change problem, it suffers the effects of it the most. That is why the African Union needs to enforce policies and programs that protect the environment and animal habitats from excessive exploitation, and if it needs to, it should be done in a sustainable way. It needs to focus more on preserving Africa's culture from Western or Eastern influence. The African Union needs to focus more on production of all kinds and building infrastructure in Africa by Africans rather than having China do so. And to embody the Pan-African model the OAU thought of 60 years ago and the AU mapped out 20 years ago, the AU needs to reach out to the African diaspora, such as Black Caribbean people, Afro-Latinos, and African Americans to build stronger connections. Also, as I mentioned before, the African Union needs to increase intercontinental trade because statistically, trade between African nations is the lowest in the world when compared to other continents. It needs to do more outreach to younger generations of Africa and to listen to them more because most of Africa is below the age of 25 and many of their needs are not being met or represented on a national or international scale. The Union needs to value African entrepreneurship rather than compromising for Western or Eastern companies. And if the African Union wants to focus on Western decolonization, they need to push efforts to decolonize the LGBTQIA+ stigma, to educate Africans on the history and significance of these people throughout Africa, and to get rid of oppressive anti-gay laws and give them equal rights as to any other citizen. Altogether, these are just a few examples of what the African Union can do to increase power, influence, and standard of living in Africa for Africans in the 21st century.
The African Union has come a long way since 1963, but it can still go a long way further. The African Union is imperfect in the sense that it contradicts some of its own doctrine, so there's still a ton of work to be done. At the end of the day, the work needs to be done as a collective, where everyone needs to come together to demand change for Africa. Something I believe is really important to acknowledge is that even though these are all ideals we need the African Union to uphold and recognize, we should also try to do what we can without expectation from governmental organizations. We need to learn how to operate in that sense, and a ton of power can come from that. We need to do everything in our power to build Africa for Africans. And on that note, I hope you enjoyed the video, and the links to my sources are listed in the description box below. Thank you for watching, and you can catch me later.